weekend, Daniel Rodriguez was formerly ranked. He's looking to regain the number. Oh, wait, no, he already has that number. He's looking to advance. He's taking on Neil Magny in a big-time opportunity. And for D-Rod, can you believe it? He's actually older than Neil Magny. And Magny came into the UFC back in 2012. Ultimate Fighter, Carwin versus Nelson. Oh boy, you remember that? Roy Nelson? I mean, just crazy stuff. But for Magny, goes through. He gets decision wins against the likes of Cameron Diffley and Bristol Murundi. These they might sound like names that I just made up on the paper,
a little
but
bit.
They're real. He gets knocked out by Mike Ricci, so then he has to build himself back up. They kept him around. He fought John Manley in his UFC debut. Neil Magny's 19-8 in the UFC. It feels like he's been around since the dawn of time, right? But if you do consider it, Rodriguez is a little bit older, but in Rodriguez's UFC tenure, it's been great so far. I mean, you consider it, he's 7-1. He's got that weird, wonky, tricky loss in his 5-on-in, that one to Nicholas Dalby. A lot of people thought D-Rod won that fight. He beats Mike Perry, he beats Preston Parsons, he beats Kevin Lee impressively, but then he has to rehab his hand. He misses a lot of time. He's not originally due Li Jingliang back a little bit ago. He was supposed to be taking on Kevin Holland, but you had the big switch up. Chimaev fights Holland, Diaz fights Ferguson. So Rodriguez fights Li Jingliang, and you think, okay, that's a fight I can rally around. It's going to be a catch weight at 180 pounds. Not a lot of people thought Daniel Rodriguez won that fight, and then a lot more people, which is why I set up the video the way I did at the start, thought, well, Rodriguez is going to be ranked after winning this fight, right? Because it's at a catchweight and he didn't win, did he? But he did get ranked. So for Rodriguez, he gets an opportunity to right the ship. Now, this fight was originally due, a few weeks ago. It was booked last month. Rodriguez out due to an elbow injury, so they remake the fight. Now, that would have been short notice for both of them. Still looming in the short notice realm, but it is a bit of an interesting fight and a bit of an odd one at that.
So last weekend's main event, I said that, hey, this fight, oddly enough, might be more important for Calvin Kattar than it is for Arnold Allen, because Calvin Kattar's had a lot of chances at the guys in the top 15. He's been in other main event opportunities in his career, so we don't know how many more chances he's going to get to fight these top-level guys before the UFC just sort of does way with him. And for Neil Magny, he really is in a similar position, because this fight against Daniel Rodriguez reminds me of 3 opponents that Neil Magny has fought in the past. And for Magny, that honestly might be a bit of a disservice because he has fought so many of the top level guys at 115 pounds. But hopefully you agree with me. Daniel Rodriguez reminds me of Lorenz Larkin, Kelvin Gastelum, and Li Jingliang for these reasons. And all of those fighters had very different results against Neil Magny, because if you are a very power-heavy fighter, you're going to be able to get through to Magny, because Magny's one of these guys we point to. Is he good at wrestling? Yeah, he's a good offensive wrestler. He's a good offensive grappler. He's a good offensive striker. He is an extremely well-rounded fighter, but any fighter who is a specialist, who does have some of these outlier skills in any one area, they're going to have success in that spot against a guy like Neil Magny. So I can see a world out there where Daniel Rodriguez uses the jab, can be that long-range striker to really threaten with power, to hurt Neil Magny when he has to. That'll keep Magny off him with the takedown attempts, and really let Rodriguez work at range where he can have success. But I can also easily lay out a game plan where Neil Magny can kind of extinguish some of the explosiveness of Daniel Rodriguez like he did against Li Jingliang. Because remember, he fought Jingliang and Rocco. It's Anthony now, or I guess it's Rocco now, Martinez, because... Martin, sorry. Because he knew he was the more powerful striker at range, so he used the clinch a lot in that fight, and I think he could have similar success against a guy like Daniel Rodriguez, but I also have to admit that since Rodriguez is the more heavy-handed striker, he could easily hit Magny with 2 or 3 counter shots to the outside and really change the tide of this fight, because there's no argument, I don't think. Rodriguez is way more likely to get a finish between these two.
I don't know if either guy's going to get a finish in this one.
Fair
I think
enough.
It's going to go to a decision, but when I do look at it for Neil Magny, maybe you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, which is a statement.
You told me not to use that when I've used that in the past.
I was just about to say, I hate to use it, I hate the saying, but I have to say it because for Magny, second to last fight against Max Griffin, who could fight a 3-round fight and then run 3 marathons. He looked great last weekend against Tim Means, but he's dropped in the first round. That was a tight fight. He kind of rallies back into it round 2, round 3. His last time out, he takes on Shavkat Rakhmonov, who... Could he fight for a title in 2023? That remains to be seen. But Rakhmonov, made him as, like he looked really good in that fight. So for Magny, it's a big time prove it spot, and we haven't seen him look like that dominant guy since the Jeff Neal fight, which again,
fight,
you could draw some parallels, Jeff Neal to Daniel Rodriguez in some of the southpaw aspects in the striking.
That's the weird thing about this matchup, though. With Magny, it's not like he's a fighter who always struggles with a certain archetype of fighter and always has success against another type. He's a cardio king. We always know that about Neil Magny. That's always the thing he's going to have an advantage on over the majority of his opponents. Even if they're a better striker, even if they're a better wrestler, they're not going to be as fresh, for the most part, as Neil Magny by the time that 5th round does come around. And that's why it's weird, but I kind of wish this was the main event, because there's a part of me that thinks Daniel Rodriguez could be a good contender in the 170-pound division. Not a top-tier contender, but just a guy who, similar to an Anthony Smith, I always point to on the wall, Calvin Kattar at 145, there's always that 1 or 2 fighters in every division who it's, hey, we need a guy to be in a main event. Who could it be? I think Daniel Rodriguez could kind of take the place that Neil Magny once held, because Magny was once that guy who, hey, we need a main event. Michael Chiesa hasn't fought in a while.
What about on a Wednesday morning?
There's nothing going on a Wednesday at 10 a.m. and everyone's locked down due to COVID. Let's let Neil Magny fight Michael Chiesa. You know what I mean, though? Daniel Rodriguez is the exciting type of fighter who I could see being placed in those types of opportunities. I just think with Neil Magny, it's always difficult to judge where his ceiling's going to be in the division, because at 35 years of age, we have seen him fight a lot of the top guys in the top 15, if not everybody in the top 15, and we have seen him struggle heavily against some of those fighters, but also, to his credit, have a lot of success against them as well.
Daniel Rodriguez, you're not going to believe this. I'm going to throw a number at you. The number 1 all-time, regardless of weight class, regardless of if it's Royce Gracie or Sean O'Malley, number 1 all-time, strikes landed per minute, 7.84.
Really?
Significant strikes landed per minute. And Neil Magny, number 1 all-time in decision wins in the UFC. Out of any of them, he has 13 of them. So if you do look at this, Matt, it is an interesting matchup. You look at the odds, they're basically at par. Some sites, Neil Magny, minus 120. Daniel Rodriguez at a minus 105 to a plus 100. We have a look at the Tapology votes. Surprise to us as they are to you. I'm going to assume Magny's a favorite, but I feel like Daniel Rodriguez has a fan support. I'm going to say Tapology over under 57.5% Rodriguez.
I think they're going to be over.
They're going to be over. They're over. So 513 total votes, 60% Rodriguez, 80% by decision. For the 40% that are Magny, 90% by decision. So is Magny chop liver off his last 2 performances, even though he's 1-1? Is Daniel Rodriguez looking great? Again, he's a contender. His hand's fine. His elbow's great. And he can slap on maybe like a neoprene sleeve and go in there and beat Neil Magny.
Like, if you fell asleep before this fight card started, let's say you texted me and said, Matt, how did the co-main event go? I feel like I could text you back and say Neil Magny won a well-rounded decision, 30-27. You'd believe me if I said that. But you'd also believe me if I said Daniel Rodriguez went out there, landed a right hook to the body and an overhand left and knocked out Neil Magny. That's how competitive
that part would surprise me.
Would it? I feel like he could. We have seen Magny get stopped in the past, especially early on in fights. Again, I bring up the Lorenz-Larkin matchup because I do think Larkin and Rodriguez have similar hand techniques. Now, I will say, Larkin was really able to get to Magny with the leg kick, and that did open up some of his boxing techniques. And of course, Daniel Rodriguez is not as dedicated with his own leg kicks, but still, D-Rod does have that kind of power in his hands to where if he won by finish, I would not be surprised whatsoever. I've had a really hard time picking this fight because, again, like I said, Magny has beaten guys like Daniel Rodriguez, looked really good, like in the Li Jingliang matchup, but he's also really struggled with guys who do have that power advantage over him. So I like Daniel Rodriguez, the slight underdog in this matchup, but that's only hinging on the fact that I think Rodriguez is going to be able to hurt Neil Magny in this fight. I think if Rodriguez can hit him like Max Griffin did, hurt him early on, I think he can put it on him and maybe get him out of there before the fight can keep on going. Whereas if Magny's going to have success, of course he's probably going to win by decision. But again, this is a very close fight.
And win, lose, or draw in Rodriguez's last fight against Li Jingliang. Short notice for both guys. They threw it together. It was a catch weight. And then you consider it, I mean, he had been off for a really long time, so that was kind of a bit of a tune-up. Now that he's back in action, maybe he's rolling like he was against Kevin Lee, against Mike Perry. For Neil Magny, I made the comparison to the fight that he had against Jeff Neal. Neil was super low on volume, like low even to his standards in that fight.
Was that his first fight back off injury?
And Magny was able to mix it up with his wrestling in that one too. I think Magny comes in with a well-rounded skill set with the wrestling, which we've seen Rodriguez taken down in the past in the UFC. Rodriguez obviously has those tricky things that he can throw at you in the clinch. The knees, the elbows, the uppercuts, and you saw that Tim Means submission that he was able to crank out early on in his tenure. But I think for Neil Magny, the well-roundedness, the skill set, one more win against a guy that's going to give him a bit of a test. I'm going to go with Neil Magny ever so slightly, but it is a really tough one in this one for both guys.
Huge welterweights, too. I cannot stress this enough. Like, Daniel Rodriguez is 6'1" at 170. Normally, he enjoys being the bigger guy in there, but against Neil Magny, who is arguably as big as a welterweight can possibly get, there's like prime Douglas Lima, and then there's Neil Magny right next to him. So I'll be very interested to see how Rodriguez does deal with the bigger guy, because you know he hasn't normally had to be in there with guys who have that height advantage over himself. But I think it's a fun fight.
Both of us were split on the pick. I've got the Haitian Sensation, Matt going with D-Rod, a guy who's added to the tattoo collection since the last time we had seen him inside of the octagon. Please let us know who you have in this matchup down below in the comments section. It gets spirited, and we need your support. So toss us a like, and if you haven't subscribed already, consider doing so, because there's so many of you that hover over that button and don't actually go for it. In the main event, Marina Rodriguez, Amanda Lemos. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.